Sure, thank you. Thanks. Okay.
All right, I will call to order the North Kingstown Temporary Advisory Committee on District Discipline. Today is Monday, February 10th. It is past 4:30, so I will call the meeting to order. I don't see anyone for public comment, so we'll move on from there. The approval of the minutes of November 21st. I know those have been sent out before. Did anybody have any questions about those? Is there a motion to approve? Motion. Second? All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
I'll abstain.
Yep, all right. So, how many we have? One abstention and everybody else approved.
Yep.
All right. So, old business. As you all know, I always leave on the deliverables and the committee goals that we always have in case we want to refer to those and go back to those, which I'm sure we will today. So I'll go on to the next one, advisory subcommittee members. I had, because this could very well be our last meeting, there was no real necessity to request new members from the administration. So I didn't put that request in for that reason. But I guess we'll see how today goes and we'll go from there if we need to. So the next item under new business is the DEI survey. I know at the last meeting that we had talked about putting input on the DEI survey that was going to go out to students, and I know a couple students have been working with the assistant superintendent on putting some discipline questions into that survey. The last update that I had is it had not gone out yet. So
yeah, I'm happy to give an update on
Yep.
that one. So I'm on that advisory committee as well, and so a student alongside with administration is working on that survey. The survey is definitely going to be more solution focused than like having students retell us kind of information we already know from the equity audit, and so it's more focused on like what are things that could be done to make you be able to approach a classmate about a microaggression, like things like that. I don't believe there's anything specific about discipline, but to your point, Rob, it hasn't gone out yet. So if this committee wanted to make a recommendation about a solution-based question that they want on there specifically related to discipline, I could get that to the student and Mr. Mesnati.
okay. And just so everyone is aware, this is Erin Earl. She's replacing Jen on the committee. She was replaced when we reorganized in December. But I know we haven't had a couple meetings, so in case you don't know who she is, that's Erin. She's the chair of the school committee as well. All right, so that's kind of where that is with the DEI subcommittee.
So do they want something or no?
I don't know. I think it really, we can talk about it. I think it's more an open discussion of what we're actually, like, the bulk of it is just recommendations to the school committee, what we've talked about so far, and I think then we can see if we have a question that we think might be warranted for the survey and go from there is how I feel. I don't know how anybody else feels.
Yeah, if you don't give it today, it won't get on. So if
Okay.
you're cool with that, that's fine. But if
Okay.
you did want something first to get some high school student feedback, this would be the moment.
Okay. All right.
Just with the timing.
So we'll keep that in mind. Okay, so the bulk of today's discussion is kind of going back through what we've talked about over the last however many months, to just discuss potential recommendations to the school committee about where we are, because technically the charter for this temporary advisory committee it's temporary, and it runs out at the end of this month. So we should come up with some kind of explanation or a really good reason why we should continue past then to try to convince the school committee to give us an extension. So what I did is the things that are listed on your agenda are kind of things that I pulled out of the last set of minutes, kind of ideas that we had tossed around, discussions that we had had to try to go through. But then I also, kind of tying back into the specific deliverables that we always kind of refer to at the beginning, I kind of have a list of those. So I know we had talked about before, and we've had discussions in the past, one of the deliverables was we were asked to come develop a matrix. And I know we had kind of said we were kind of matrix adverse. I don't know if we still feel that way, or does anybody have any suggestions? I know we didn't like that suggestion necessarily. We didn't like that model of having a matrix.
A discipline matrix.
A discipline matrix.
Where this plus this equals that.
Right.
Yeah.
So where you kind of say, you know, go down the list, this equals this, and one size fits all kind of thing for that particular infraction. So I don't know, do we want to discuss that? Does anybody have any feedback? Do we still feel that way? Do we not want to have a matrix? And is that the message we want to send to the school committee?
I just have a thought.
Mhm.
I totally understand the logic behind the this plus this equals this being off-putting, or maybe not what we're hoping the message to be, but then from a practicality standpoint, when being, not that I'm in it currently, but I have been in it, when I have to, or the deans or the other assistant principal at the high school has to administer consequences, how can we make sure that's done fairly from the perspective of the parents? Let's say, you know, if we don't have a clear process or at least a clear framework that supports the work, because I often get back, you know, well, this kid got this, or this kid's parents said this, and how is this fair if I think they talk to each other? And so I know that it's never perfect, but are we suggesting like not having a framework, or are we suggesting making the framework different?
It's been a couple of months since we talked about it. I feel like someone showed us was more like the template of, okay, this happens and you have this range of things that could happen.
Yep.
As
Choices.
opposed to kid wore his hat, you get automatic.
Oh,
credit.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
I don't think it was, I think we were trying to get away from,
Yep.
if A happens, you get B, then C.
Yep,
It was
yep.
more like, this happened, it falls under this tier.
And here's a
and
framework of
here's what you
things.
can be doing, maybe like first offense, second, like, and it's very open.
Yep. Yep.
But
No, I
still,
like that.
but still has a guideline. I
Perfect.
thought
Okay,
that's
thank
what we
you.
kind of thought the direction we were
Yeah,
going.
that makes sense.
I also personally, like, my big issue has always been like context and degree issues. You know, like whenever you meet, it's always like the first meeting, you know, and the situation is always like there's no context and degree other than towards the negative. You know, there's no positive context and degree of like, here's what teacher A did, or here's what the student did last year that was positive. They just have like all their ducks in a row for like negative, both against the teacher and against the student, really. It's like nobody wins, because like you'll be sitting there and they'll be like, well, the teacher, you know, September 8th did not approach the student professionally. And then they'll be like, and the student didn't respond properly September 8th, but no one talks about like that you met like last year and had a positive resolution with a teacher and a positive resolution with a student, that student with that teacher. So then you can kind of like give this new teacher all that information like somewhere. Like there's no record of it, there's no talk about it. So as a teacher, you're coming in with like, I would have loved to know that Andrew's trigger was A, and no one ever let me know, no one ever talked about it, like, and that's just always been my issue. It's like, you know, whenever you have a parent-student meeting for behavioral or academics, it's always like tabula rasa of like, oh, my child never had this issue before, and then when you do a little data dig, you find out they've had this issue a lot, and it's been sometimes solved and sometimes not, and I just, it's like why there's no like, and don't get me wrong, everything should be sealed and private and only professionals should have access to it, but like everyone in the school department who's on staff is agreed to the privacy issue to get your contract, to be paid. Like that should be a given, that you're a teacher, you're getting access to what happened the previous year, discipline and behavioral, that, you know, that you can't talk about it, like, you know,
I
it's
think
common.
also that highlights that there's the lack of consistency between schools, between documentation, so
Yeah.
depending on either where a student comes from, what middle school they're in, high school, elementary school, is you get different pockets of information.
Exactly.
And so I think where you look at it is the overarching goal is to have everyone in the district on the same page and what's being documented. And Aspen, it sounds like, is challenging to document that,
Yeah.
right? So last time we talked about maybe different avenues to make sure that we have more information on students who may be struggling versus
Branching
just the
lines.
offense.
Branching lines, does that kind of cover what she's referring to?
We had talked about that as well.
Yes, because that's gonna be eventually expanded, it's not to the high school yet, next year it goes
There's
to
a
middle school.
behavior log on, we haven't used it yet, at QUID, because we're kind of figuring out, they do have a behavior incident report, but we were required to put things in Aspen per ride. So what I put in there is not going into Aspen, which won't go to ride. So we're trying to figure out how we can, I mean, I really like the report and utilize it, and it's, I mean, branching minds is a beautiful thing. You know, I can pull you up and I can see from attendance to behavior to academics. But it's the ride reporting is why we're
But
kind of.
you don't have to report all the discipline to ride, only the major that led to
Well-
discipline, like if it leads to suspension. But what's being used to do minor offenses too.
See, I don't do minor offenses in Aspen. It goes back to consistency.
Yeah.
But there is, so yeah, exactly. What you-
This meeting's fun.
Right.
Maybe like a matrix, not for the punishment, but a matrix for like meetings and how things are handled might be nice.
Protocols, you're thinking,
Yeah,
maybe.
protocols.
Protocol.
Like have it's like
It
specific
probably does have more
protocol.
at the elementary level, just because one teacher's in charge of
Yeah.
that kid for a year, as
Yeah.
opposed to kids,
Many
you might
teachers.
see one kid for one period every other day.
Yeah.
You know, just, so no one's in charge of the high school kid, like they are at elementary, we're the same 25.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
with them all year, and then if I'm third grade and she's fourth, I might say,
But what about
okay,
guidance counselors? Could they be like the case manager of that type of stuff? I don't know what the high
I
school
don't know
looks
their
like
role.
at all.
In full transparency.
I don't wanna pretend to know that I do.
That probably would be really difficult for them to
Okay.
manage, not that they wouldn't happily do it.
Yeah, yeah.
But they have a lot on their plates, their
Okay.
caseloads are like around 250 kids, if not more, and they have to do, all the college and career preparations and whatnot.
For this committee, since we're really just talking about the data from the audit, which was suspensions, so it is the severe offenses, and we're not talking about, just for this committee, preventing student behaviors or anything like that in whatever. We're talking about student X versus student, Y, doing the same thing, who's getting suspended. I don't care if we call it a matrix or whatever, but we should have a consistent, code of conduct. So, when we talk about those gray areas, and when it comes to doling out discipline, that's where bias is able to leak in, and, she's always been a good kid, whatnot. I feel like that's really what we're talking about with this particular committee. So is there a way to, even if it's not a matrix, ask the school committee to revise or look at the language, or ask the administration to look at the language of the code of conduct in the student handbooks to ensure.
That was,
I think that was one.
that is
we-
definitely
Yeah.
one of our recommendations we've talked about for sure.
So that would if we made a separate matrix, would that be different?
No, I just think, I think that's a recommendation, we can say that there should be something that creates consistency in the handbooks, code of conduct within the handbook, which, I know specifically we talked about that, like
Middle
the middle
schools.
schools handbooks are different.
And the administration
They
is
shouldn't
looking
be.
at that.
Yeah.
The
The
middle,
school
on the
committee
middle
doesn't-
school level.
The school
Right.
committee doesn't oversee the handbooks.
Right,
Right.
They don't
but
approve
they
them?
can ask the middle school to review them.
I had that reaction too.
Okay. Huh.
So
Yeah,
who
that's-
technically approves this handbooks?
The
Superintendent.
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 And
But
they
we-
are, that is, the
All right,
lack of
sorry, my
consistency is
mistake.
definitely a concern,
So
especially
we can
from
have
the
the
elementary
handbook,
schools
but
and
we
middle
all have
schools.
to, and if we go back to the first bullet, I don't know if it's necessarily training, but vocabulary and definitions, and I think we need to start with the common understanding of framework and language around that. I
Right.
think that's where, we're human, so we're gonna have maybe some inconsistencies. I think why a matrix, from the special ed point of view, you really, sometimes A doesn't equal B, because a child has needs that parent
Are not
C
the
may
same.
not even understand and don't know about. So I think that's where the matrix gets tricky, because you are, as administrator, making decisions what best meets the needs of the child in front of you, also while supporting possibly their needs and disabilities.
As somebody who wrote the sentence about the matrix, I think the goal was what you were talking about was that consistency piece and trying to minimize the bias piece. You know, so I don't think it's to prescribe like X happens and then it has to
Yeah.
be this, but it's more like these are different levels of violations and these are possible interventions that might happen, and this is what happens with first offense, second offense, and third offense. And I think it also was to protect and support administrators in transparency to parents and guardians to be able to say like, hey, this is what happened, and this is the matrix that we're using to kind of work through this, and this is the second time it's happened, and therefore this, right? Like, and so I think it's not to take any, like anything away from the administrators in the building, but it's to give some sort of scaffolding to help with that, and because we have nothing, you know, I feel like we need to
Well,
put
elementary schools
something.
do, because we worked on this
They
4
did
years
together.
ago,
Yeah.
and we all have the same thing. Now, if we're all, following, I can't speak
What do you
for
mean
anyone
say,
else.
what do you
We
mean say that?
created tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, what it looks
Yeah.
like, and possible, either interventions and or follow-up consequences. So, we have created a document that we all, like what goes in Aspen, but we probably need to recalibrate that, because we've since have had new administrators come on and all of that, but we spent, our summer retreat working on that.
And when we looked at the separate school pullouts, all the elementary school numbers were wildly different, so you wonder too, who's using the framework, even if it's there.
Well, and also I think the parent piece, because like as a parent of two elementary school children, I've never heard that before. And so, I'm not sure, again, like with the transparency piece to parents and supporters, like in
We
family
just need to be
members.
consistent,
Yeah.
but we all do PBIS, so I feel like I can speak for elementary. But, okay, I have a PBIS handbook, but we all have a handbook, but it might look different, right? Our expectations, but if we can start with aligning that.
So I heard 2 recommendations, and see if I'm wording these correctly. The first one I heard was, I'm trying to write them out so that we can put them, consistent code of content including a tiered behavioral framework with a range of options. Does that describe? That's kind of what
Yeah.
and the other one, is kind of what you said, but what I really think we need is that we're using a consistent PBIS model in the district, that's a model we're using. Whatever curriculum you use after that, Choose Love, Circle, Conscious Discipline, they're all PBS minded, but I think we need to go to a very clear PBS model.
What is that?
Because that would
stand
give
for?
you, positive behavior interventions and supports, but that would give you all the same common language definitions and those other pieces. And it is a training that we can do. Right now, we're planning to send some people to a training in May in Mystic for that. So to me, it seems like the right structure in which for us to.
Provides a really
recommend.
strong structure.
Very strong
And I
structure.
would say it probably should be K to 12.
Yeah.
I just, can only speak about what it could look like in the elementary school, so, middle
We're
and
looking at
high.
doing that in middle school too.
No, we don't have a formal PBIS program at the high school. They have like,
I think
their
Quid
way
is
of
the only one
approaching.
that technically does have it, right?
yeah.
No, everyone
No,
has it.
the
Everybody
The
elementary
elementary
do.
schools
We all
Yeah.
blew up our, yeah.
all does the same, what's it called?
PBIS.
No,
PBA.
but what's the,
Oh,
Like mine are safe, responsible, respectful,
Yeah.
we have a pledge
Yeah.
that we say every day, so our, for those 3, we have what it looks like in the common areas, in the cafeteria, at recess, in the hallway, and when we're teaching children, we refer back to those expectations. And there's like explicit lesson plans that also go for the teachers,
So what I would say is I think it's most, being in all the buildings all the time, is it's most consistently implemented with the same language at Quid, but I see evidence in all the elementary buildings. And I do see a poster in one of our middle schools, but I don't hear the language within that school. Does that make sense? So there might be a poster, but it's not part of the
it's not being
culture of the
practiced
school.
or-
Right.
Okay.
And for the high school, we have initiatives that would fall under that window, but it's not necessarily called that or labeled that at this time.
So it's not formalized.
so what would
Right.
that look like for a district?
So what that looks like is that you,
Do you buy
Info-
something?
it's actually pretty free. You can go to PBS World and get all the materials, but how to use those materials is the training that,
So that first time.
that we've already asked about sending people to, so. I know that there are several principals who are going in May,
Is that elementary school or
middle school.
middle school?
And
So the two middle schools.
And Joe.
And Joe.
Yep. Yeah, so it's nice because of that, because it's not something like you buy, it's more like talking about a philosophy
Philosophical.
and putting in
Yeah.
the supports, so it's more that than a thing that you purchase, if that makes
It's a
sense.
philosophical.
So when
It's
we,
philosophical.
when the school committee gave this assignment to the advisory committee, like, we knew we wanted that, so I don't know if your recommendation back can be, we want that. Like, you know, like, we
Yeah,
were asking this group, I think, to get a
Mr.
little bit
Mazzani
deeper.
pushed for it too, I mean,
I just think what we're saying is, yes, that's what you're asking for, but what we're saying is that we would recommend that we adopt a PBS model
Mhm.
versus we need something. We're saying we'd like to adopt that model. To
Like
me, that,
district-wide.
yeah, cause to me that answers the things that we've talked about, vocabulary, definitions, understanding what to expect. It also can help us with the reporting, so it kinda addresses some of the things that have been talked about in multiple meetings, if we have that type of model. And yes, it can be a little bit different, the high school versus the middle school, but I do think we should have consistency throughout the district, so that kids are used to that language.
I was gonna say, it's common language for
It's
kids who
common
grow up
language,
through the.
right. It's kinda like what we've done with safety care, right? We've done safety care training, we did common language, then we went to every faculty meeting so that people were a little more familiar with the language, and then there's other people that are more highly trained in it, right?
and philosophically, the pushback that you would probably get from some teachers without being fully trained and understanding is they think it lacks the consequence piece, and it doesn't, it's just trying to really be proactive and really teaching the expectations, doesn't mean that the child doesn't get a consequence if they're unsafe.
So does a PBIS have,
it rewards more what you're doing when you're doing things well.
Well,
yep, so we were talking about like discipline, consistency, and trying to remove bias from when a student does need to be disciplined. So how does that PBIS system connect to a discipline matrix?
so to me, the PBIS is the tier one, right? That's what you're doing, that's your system that you live in. Underneath that now becomes a code of conduct as well as that tiered framework when there is an issue. Cause it is a tiered system,
Yep, so when it's a tier 3,
yeah.
does it give that consistency that we're looking for, or do we need
No,
something
you'd have to
else?
add another piece to this regarding that framework,
Yep,
cause
so I
that
think
would be
that's what
part
the,
of that.
I think that's what the question is.
It's like the umbrella that it falls under.
Yeah, so then when the school committee says, yes, PBIS is great, that sounds lovely, let's implement that. And then we say, okay, where's the discipline, like, how are we gonna have consistency and discipline, then what happens?
So then someone would have to sit down and create that.
This committee.
No, I didn't think,
The assignment was draft and recommend a disciplinary matrix. So,
I think there's been some disagreement regarding that.
Yeah, I don't think I ever heard that was the assignment.
Brad?
I think we reviewed that, but then when
We
it came
re-
up, people
yeah,
were not
we have
exactly,
reviewed it.
there was a lot of pushback on.
I just didn't know that was, I thought the whole assignment was just to look at our
To
practice.
recommendations, yeah.
Based on the data, look at our practices system-wide and, kind of do more of a needs assessment of where we need to go for recommendations.
We got stuck a lot in the weeds instead of looking at the overarching.
Yeah.
Correct.
I think is what happened.
Yep.
So I think I think actually creating the behavioral matrix was a little bit of a cart before the horse, and that might be why we got a little bit bogged down, because we don't have that, what we came to find out, looking at the data and looking at things like the handbook and all that, is that we had this high level of inconsistency. So I think that's kind of what happened, so then we got bogged down in talking about that, and then some were looking at curriculum, we're like, that's not what we're really here to do, we had to bring it back a little bit. So I think we lost a little bit of momentum with that, but I do think if we say, listen, we wanna adopt a PBS model, part of that would be to develop this code of conduct, that's a piece of that. To me, that would be a legitimate recommendation, and we're not reinventing a whole behavioral matrix, which I don't think would be a good idea.
Is what's
That we
in
do
the
as part of that
elementary
system.
school applicable if modified to
Middle
middle and high?
Yeah, I do think people need to be, they need to be trained on how to implement that.
Well, I was gonna say, I think I think everybody not only needs to be trained, like, I think it all needs to be rolled out as one, like you're saying, one umbrella.
Yeah.
Even though you have an elementary handbook, like, has there really been any formal training with every elementary teacher to say, hey, this is how we're doing this, so that it all looks the same in 5 schools. Same thing in the middle. I mean, high school's easy, you get one roof, but I think that's where it lacks.
Yep.
Like you said, we did start with safety care, like here is the broad overall
Overview,
piece,
yes,
so
yeah.
everybody in the building hears the same kind of theme behind it, and then people who work more directly with more significant kids have more training.
It's really to address like the common language and definitions.
I was
think
gonna
that's
say,
the
I'm looking
piece.
at my definitions now, like for my minor, I have, inappropriate verbal language, the definition, low intensity instance of, inappropriateness, physical contact, non-serious but inappropriate, physical contact, we often call like a microaggression, you know, kid walks by and just sort of does like this,
That's not a microaggression.
well,
That's not a microaggression.
that's a microaggression,
When a kid taps another kid with their shoulder.
yeah.
Okay.
That's what, it's a microaggression with, especially at the elementary level, you know, which over time, we have diminished that because my school psychologists work intensely on microaggressions and explain it to kids why that's inappropriate, but that's, neither here nor there. Disrespect, disruption, property misuse, low property misuse, breaking a pencil as opposed to, but this is just definitions that we have come up with as a staff years ago. They're not saying, it could change, but this, at least the staff can go to it and have a common, we can unpack what something is or not. You know, my psychologist would probably argue with you, like, what microaggressions are. So, but the point is, and then we have our majors, harassment, bullying, fighting, physical, abusive language, what vandalism and property damage looks like, and just really defining those. So if we can do that district-wide, probably K to 12, because those are things that happen at all levels.
Yeah, and that would create that framework
Discipline
that people are
matrix.
talking about, and that we really need. But also, I think would help with the consistency, Andrew, that you're kind of talking about, if this is being kind of documented. I think the problem with it being in Aspen is if you have only, it doesn't necessarily tell you exactly what happened. Not always does it always tell you what happened in Aspen, especially when they're coming up from another grade. It might help with that piece too.
I just, like, one of my big issues with, like, a lot of things, like discipline, academics, like, this analogy works, to just bear with me for a second. It's like when you're in academics and you're doing curriculum, and people think like a textbook canned curriculum is the way to go, and you would rather have a framework, because a framework is just goals, standards based, and then it's fluid because human beings change and kids change and texts change, and so you want like a framework. And I kind of feel like that's the solution for discipline, is we need a framework of like terminology, goals, progressive discipline, people documenting and talking and having conversations, one-on-one conversations. Like something as simple as, I personally feel you should never do a virtual meeting when you're involving discipline. I think if people are talking about serious issues, it should be face-to-face. You should not, virtual meetings should not, that might mean you get the parents a bus, you might get them transportation, get them an Uber, but you should not be doing a virtual meeting about important behavioral issues. That's just my personal opinion from my research. So like having a framework, like, you know, that we're all on the same page timeline, we're all on the same page like recording, we're all on the same page of like progressive discipline to help them change and help them grow and be a member. Because my biggest issue is what I've dealt with since 2003 is we kind of have like the 80s analogy of like, in the 80s they used to have like security systems that was like a dog would bark when you hit the doorbell, and then the criminals would soon figure out like, if I just hit the doorbell, it's not a dog, it's a dog. And we kind of did that with discipline. We'd be like, okay, you do A, we give you B, you do B, we give you C, and then when you do C, we give you nothing, we just don't do anything. Like that's what happened in the high school for a lot of years. We give you A when you did A, then we give you B when you did B, then you do C, and we're not gonna talk about C, cause C never happens. And then when C happens, we'd be like, oh, we're just gonna pretend it doesn't exist, and we have such great kids that C doesn't happen that often, so it's, Andrew, Mr. Property, you're in trouble, cause you happen to get the one kid who goes to C, and that's why teachers would get frustrated and kids would get frustrated, so I'm just hoping we get like a framework with a fluidity of different schools and different kids, and have like certain terminology, that's just what I would like.
Yeah, so I think that's why we were talking about, cause this is a tiered behavior framework with a range of options versus just a, equation, cause that's not been successful from what I understand. And it still has led to some people thinking that things are being done unfairly. Does that sound accurate? I was trying to remember what you guys were saying.
What do the students think about, like, do you understand what we're talking about, of like how we're talking about frameworks and matrix-ish? Do you think that would be helpful as a student to have that understanding, or not helpful? What do you think would happen if we had like a document or like a philosophy on like the, what's it called?
Code of conduct.
Positive behavioral interventions and
PBIs.
supports, like,
Yeah.
what do you think about those things?
I mean, definitely if you, sorry, if you gave us like a layout, like from the beginning, like from the get-go, you had that, like, this is what's gonna happen, like no matter your skin tone, no matter your sexuality, whatever discriminations that have been like, a part of like the problem, if you just lay it out for us from the beginning, I think it would like be helpful, because like it's there and you have to like uphold yourself to it, like it's written there, so you can't try to like wiggle around any other lines, you know what I mean?
Like if you're being straight with us.
Exactly,
You know what I mean?
and like it's there, like we can't be surprised, and then if you try to do something differently, we can be like, but wait, this says this.
So it's transparency and trust.
Yeah.
This looks like what you're looking for.
There's like a list.
Yeah. Does the tiered system of support, does that allow the flexibility, whereas, just because two students may have the same infraction, one student may have a lot more going on in their life outside of school that we might know about, or maybe we don't. Does it give that flexibility to account for that? Whereas one student may need a lot more, is that the multi-tiered system of support, the MTSS system? Or?
No, I think that's a little bit different, that is within PBIS, BBS is a piece of that, but I think what I hear being said is that tiered framework with a range of options does give you that flexibility, but also lays it out for students so that there's transparency and trust that things are happening. Now, what will always happen is, someone who's received discipline, but that person over there didn't get that, but they don't necessarily know what has happened for that student. So that I don't think is gonna ever kind of go away, but as far as a framework that we're all looking at, staff, admin, students, parents, whoever, guardians, families, and we're all looking at and agree that this is how we wanna approach it, I do think it would decrease some of the biases that might be occurring, like you were saying.
There is a code for the high school, which I assume, suspensions, I don't know, how many elementary students are getting suspended for.
A lot.
So, at least the high school has attached to its handbook, this looks like a matrix to me, like, first offense, second offense, third offense for these things, it's there, is this something that can be revised? Looking at it, this particularly for the language, looking at this particularly for the, things on it.
To kind of like comment on that, and something else that just came up. In my experience here, I've been here for a year and a half, but in my experience here, there's only really specific items that it's like a carte blanche, this is what you're getting, and that's typically like drug use, assault,
Yeah,
it's like across the board, it was what it was, it's against the law, this is what the outcome is.
Well, sometimes
there
those are
are-
the easiest one to address, I hate to
There's
say
like
it.
Absolutely,
disrupting
and
class
so-
on here, disorderly conduct,
Yeah.
that's kinda
Those
like,
are the, yeah, what's
Yeah.
disruptive to you may not be disruptive to you,
That's
might not
subject-
be
yeah, it's
disruptive
subjective.
to
cut or
you.
skipped class, well,
Yeah.
I just went for 20 minutes, cause I was in the prom ticket line,
Yeah.
there's a lot of those little
Gray areas.
gray areas. that
And,
are-
right, so what, at the high school, at least, using that matrix, those gray areas are the areas that there are deeper discussions about what prompted this, what's going on beyond that behavior. There's a lot of discussions on you know, every behavior usually has a set of symptoms behind it, right? And so I do, you know, observe them kind of digging deeper, and that matrix allows for that flexibility. So when we're talking about like suspensions, typically for us, it's like those non-negotiables,
Yeah.
typically.
And I think in elementary, not that
Or
there was a
it's
lot,
like
it was
third, fourth, fifth offense type of
inconsistent.
thing.
I think the data showed the inconsistencies and what some kids were suspended for and maybe not others. I think that's what we kind of unpacked.
Yeah, and there's things on here, like you can choose
Yeah.
5 to 10 days. So you could choose 5 for someone and 10 for, you know, there's like that kind of,
There's variance depending,
Right.
like if it's a first offense or second offense, and for certain things, the student can choose, like if it's a nicotine offense, they can
Mhm.
choose to go into a vaping program with our student assistance counselor versus
Yeah.
a suspension.
Yeah.
You know, there's some stuff kind of baked into it that we're talking about, but I do agree that kind of like formalizing it, reverbaging it, and spreading it across the district is good, so that our students who are coming all the way through have that common language, common understanding, like you said, the transparency, right, what's expected.
I think we just have to focus now what's gonna be our goal if we wanna continue the committee. What
Of creating that matrix.
handbook matrix, consistency. I mean, we can create something as well as one, but the adults,
What I would say is I
the
don't.
adults need to be part of it, the work, I think, in order, I don't think for this committee to create it and saying, I think the adults doing the work need to be part of the creation.
That's what I was gonna say.
Well,
I
why
don't think
hasn't
this
that,
is
I think the
right.
problem is that hasn't happened, and so we were trying to have this committee with a combination of parents, students, and staff put forward some things to give them a head start. Like, obviously, the administration will implement certain things, but I think where we were stuck is that we're looking at data where there's disproportional discipline happening in very clear patterns, and like this, we were looking for this committee to move some things forward. So, because like if we're saying like the PBIS is free and accessible and we're not choosing it, like that, there's a barrier there for some reason, whether it's time or resources or whatnot. But like, you know, so I feel like we need to figure out like what's needed to make that happen, because there's clearly some reason that it's not happening district-wide, and obviously we've had administrative changes, but also it's been 2 years since, you know, the superintendent and this, like, you know, like, so I think we're trying to move it forward, and so looking at what that could be. Cause to say that this committee shouldn't do that matrix, okay, well then, is it that this committee makes the recommendation of how quickly that needs to happen and when it gets implemented?
I think that should be more in that realm, cause I think in creating that matrix or that framework beyond PBS, you know, under PBS, it needs to be done by, we need the input of deans, we need the input of the principals, because they're
Teachers,
the
too.
ones that are doing
I think
the
the goal
input
was
of
to get the
teachers,
input of students and get the input of family members too, because we were trying to
Yeah,
make it so that it's a
students.
360, but that's why this committee, I think, was formed, to like have all those voices in that
I would think,
zone.
I think that, my opinion, and only my opinion, would be that, that gets, a draft is created, and then you bring other people on board to look at it. Definitely the students, definitely the families, definitely teachers, to look at, to poke the holes in it. But if we're thinking about, I would not feel comfortable creating that framework, because I don't know, I'm not the one dealing with discipline every day, I'm not the one being subjected to discipline. And I would want the opinion of the folks that are seeing, what types of cases are they seeing every single day. I would also go out there to say that I think the disproportionality has also decreased, cause I'm seeing different types of, information coming out.
So, just to summarize what you're saying, it shouldn't be us making it first, it should be other people and then we revise it later.
Yeah, then you take a look at the draft of it, because it's very hard to create something from fresh and new.
Mhm.
It's much easier to take a draft that's created and then give, what is your input on that? What do you think about, does this seem fair, does this not seem fair?
I do agree with that sentiment, because I feel like that's maybe why we were getting blocked, because we didn't know where to start, because we
Right.
didn't know we were.
We had a lot to say, but we didn't,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I just distinctly remember saying, we're not gonna solve systematic,
You-
discrimination
That's how you
in this
ended up.
meeting.
Yeah.
Remember that? I mean, that was a couple meetings ago, but that really definitely, cause what we're talking about is trying to take on too much to solve, and you said that very clearly. Our
Yeah,
job
but
is
we-
not to get rid of,
We
Just,
can work
yeah.
on it in our district though. I think that's the goal. Like
I'm
it's hard, but I
wondering
can be
if
able to.
we have, elementary, middle, and high, all with the PBI, like if the recommendation can be, you know, we are, okay, maybe people, I don't want anyone to get offended, cause we have PBIS, reimagining PBIS, we're bringing it back to life, and, you know, the elementary team really work on it together, middle and highs, cause the matrix, you know, we do so much teaching at the elementary level that there's more teaching into probably a lot more than you see at the high school level. We're building that foundation, we're building the skills, right? So, I think the matrices will look different in elementary, middle, and high. Do you agree with that, or do you think there should be one matrix K to 12?
I think
Most districts have one matrix K to 12. If you look at what other places have, the consequences might be different for the age, but most are
Oh, yeah,
most are
but
listed
definitions and
the
stuff
same.
like that,
Yeah.
right?
So when they're transitioning,
Yes,
like
yes.
year to year and school to school, they go from Quid to Forest Park, vice versa, that they have consistency.
Yeah, just like I would probably treat kindergarten different than 5th grade, so I get that.
But I
So
think
it's-
that's part of your tiered options that we talked about.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
somewhat in that one piece of that.
It's whatever you said those, whatever the 4 words were that you
Mm.
teach students from the beginning, so like every school has the
Their
same 4
own-
words and
They will,
and that's the
but
frame.
that's not PBIS, schools
Yeah.
need to be, personalized, and
Yeah.
you do the words that align with what you're working on at your school level.
Yeah.
So the framework of PBI is more philosophical,
Okay.
you know, people like to do cutesy stuff, and I'm like, no, I'm just like, that's me, and I'm like, I don't wanna make it so cutesy, I just wanna make it as simple and clear and transparent,
Safe,
to kids.
responsible,
and I
and
mean,
respectful.
Should we make a
Typically-
recommendation then, and this kind of, I'm just throwing this out there to see what people feel about it. If the middle school principals are going, should we make the recommendation that training should also be extended to someone, to at least a couple people at the high school, to include them in starting the process of formalizing that system at the high school?
Yeah, I definitely think the deans and the assistant principal of student services,
So that's where some of the, an expense piece, I think, would come in, as far as, you know, that will be something that we'll have to look at about including them in the training. Should that happen this summer while these other people are going?
It's in
Should
May.
it- So it's in May, okay.
And it's in Mystic, so it's close. And it's by the New England PBIS group, which is,
And do we know
Well,
how much
no.
that training is, or
off the top of my head, I think it was $256 a person.
$256?
It was something like that, I have to
but
double check.
Sergeant sent him at Rhode Island College
Yeah.
many years ago.
Yeah, me too.
so I think like we need to consider that the 3 of them are managing like 50% of the district. You know, we have a lot of kids, and when they have needs, they're bigger needs because they're older, you know, so I think whatever support they can get. And they likely have, they definitely have a lot to weigh in on this discussion and how that would be formed, because they're, you know, dealing with it all day, every day, and in these deep conversations with families and whatnot. So I think that would be important.
Jackie, can you remind me, the high school deans and
Yeah.
who's the other person?
It's
Eric.
Eric
Eric.
Anderson, yep,
And the
DiPolito, Springer, and Anderson,
assistant principal of,
student services.
thank you.
Yep, so he oversees the deans. It's typically the 2 of them doing most of the legwork, but if something becomes, you know, more escalated, he gets involved, or,
I just didn't wanna get the name wrong.
yep.
I wanna be clear, this is just a starting point, like, I know we wanna rush forward to make sure that we're all considered, but starting point, because then the consequences, and I'm just thinking of restorative, like the options of what we can do when there are infractions, you need deep training in that as well, right? This is not going to be like, people need to understanding of
Yep.
options out there, so I think it's gonna be a process, and it might not be as quick as
I think
you
that's
all would
where-
like, you know?
Well, I think that's where, and again, I don't know what happened for the past year in this group, but I think that was one of the things that we were looking for, some recommendations on equity-focused discipline training for district employees. And like, cause again, like who's gonna, like we need to kind of just start kicking some things off, to your point, like it's not gonna be quick. And so I think that's what they were looking for, is for this group to make what those recommendations should be. So I think what you all came up with setting folks to PBIS is great. And then I think like the goal of this was to have you all also make recommendations on the other side of what opportunities and trainings are available.
I think we talked quite a bit about restorative justice.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that would be an additional recommendation, correct?
Eventually down the line, I think
Yeah.
that would be,
I just wanna add it as the recommendation, cause it's really I'm trying to put it like a tier, so you have PBS, then you have that consistent conduct and tiered, and then you have restorative practices.
And I think that I remember last year at one point, we talked about how we didn't wanna get too far off of what the core of the team was. I think at that time we were analyzing the
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 data.
ACT data, the Equity Act data. And there is an element of this when we look into the data that, you know, I would like to always make assumptions that everybody moves forward with best intentions, but there are trends with like which teachers or which individuals in the building are consistently, you know, writing students up or writing that specific students within the historically marginalized people groups that we were looking into up. And so I know that's an undercurrent. I think a framework is important to start with, but then in order for the framework to be effective, there has to be a philosophical change. And whatever program or trainings that we do to support that. I know at the high school would be really helpful, and I also know, just speaking for the high school, many teachers have asked us, you know, what are ways that we can better support, you know, so I think that they're on board. I think just equalizing everything is helpful.
Well, I think that goes back to, some things are like structural and systematic, like it's not the people,
Right.
like being
Right.
overtly X, like
Right.
it's built in, and part of that built in is not proper training and not having
Lack of
proper.
awareness, yeah.
Yeah, and so, lack of awareness, not having proper training, like that's a systematic flaw in education sometimes, and so it's figuring out how to get that to folks. So I think we know what the need is, but like, as somebody who doesn't work in K-12, like I don't know, that the school committee needs to know like what it could look like or what it might be, like restorative practices is such a amorphous word, like what does that mean? Is there like a restorative training school that we can send people to? What does it look like? How much money is it?
It's a training.
But like,
But
do
I
you
don't-
go to the Institute
not like
for
a
Restorative Practices? Is there
There's different
regional ones?
training.
Is it online? How much is it? You know, like I think that's some of the stuff that,
It's usually a train the trainer model, often is a train the trainer model, they can come into district to train and things like that. I'm not exactly sure for,
It's like we're
I think
missing budget
PBS
season
comes
now,
first though, before
so.
you go to restorative justice.
why? A genuine question, why?
Because you need to have the same common framework and the same common understanding, and then this, and restorative practices are more, how are you handling the discipline? And if you're trying to do two pieces at the same time, I think that's gonna be a lot, cause it's the same people that would be through that same type of training. Do you know what I'm talking about, Caroline?
yes.
Being through both those trainings. So
The
I think you
identified
need.
problem though is the discipline part, so do you start with the other side?
So let me equate this back to safety care. I know we talked about it a couple of times. So I came into the district, we saw that there are a lot of restraints, physical management's occurring, right? I look at it, I know we're using the CPI model. I recommended going to safety care because it changes the mindset and the philosophy of why we do what we do. So we went back, I didn't start with just don't physical management. We start with the philosophical background. We gave lots of de-escalation training, 9 out of the 12 hours is that. Then we added the physical management, and that has resulted in less physical management by a lot. So it's the same thing here. If we don't create that kind of common language that safety care gave us in this model, like having that PBS definitions and understanding, then just simply addressing the discipline isn't gonna fix the issue. You need,
Yeah,
you
that
need the
makes-
whole system. But does it have to be necessarily slow? I just think we have to be careful about how the trainings occur.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? to
Yeah,
you?
that makes sense, but restorative justice is a thing on its own.
Absolutely, it
You
is.
can just have restorative justice
No,
without a
but this is
PBIS
where we
model.
can actually often get our students involved, if they have you have a framework of when you're gonna do more of these type of practices, and then what I would love to see is the students are having a student panel of how to address some of these issues based on that framework. And that could be restorative, they do a restorative circle, things like that.
Do
Which
we have
would be
any
really
restorative
awesome.
practices at like the high school level? Like is that,
Let me think of like specific incidents. Yeah, we have peer-to-peer, supports. It's a group where they're, you know, bringing awareness and providing supports student to student. We have, and let me know if I'm diverging, we have, you know, opportunities for like education and support in place of discipline. So like I said, if it's a nicotine or a marijuana infraction, they can instead work with our student assistance counselor to support that. Oftentimes our deans will facilitate kind of like student to student, as long as both students are open to it, like
Mediation. kind of
remediation
mediation.
type things.
Yeah.
So those options are typically
Yep.
a very common part of their practice when they're talking with students. And a lot of support, you know, if one example was there was a student who we noticed having significant behaviors, and we then learned that there was both home and food insecurity. And so, you know, the admin team band together to provide food and provide support and housing. You know, it's like things like that are kind of transiently happening throughout, but
So-
not necessarily like
So I was-
Consistent,
Yeah.
consistently.
But restorative, I agree, it can't happen in itself, you know, we do some practices, cause I've had training, and so my school psychologist, and there's practices that are proactive that we do, like high-low circles, and we kind of, there's a lot of proactiveness as well. But it's the primary is for kids to take accountability for their actions, knowing they hurt the community and how they're gonna give back to the community. So different things that you can do are, you know, circle up, take accountability, you have to be willing, in really good old, community service works, right? Like, you know, especially you call a parent, like, are you okay with them having the custodian out, they threw food in the cafeteria, you know? And usually parents are like, I would always get permission from a parent, like, yeah, make them, you know, so it's giving back to the hurt and harm that they gave to the community.
What did the students think about that?
If community service.
No, like the concept of like restorative justice and kind of what the
Yeah.
administrators are talking about.
Yeah, we talked about the panel of students
Yes,
before,
yeah.
and I really like that idea. We talked about it in previous meetings.
I think it would be cool, and it just, you know, it comes down to selecting the right group of students that like
Mhm.
are really passionate about the subject and would truly advocate for it.
Yeah.
And one thing that I wanna add, and please weigh in if you guys feel differently. One of the things that I notice, especially of our deans, is that although they're upholding the framework, they also are building really tremendous relationships with the students that need it the most. And I feel like although they have to have difficult conversations, it's often those same students that are kind of coming to them for support and leaning into them, or they're physically naming on our student surveys them being the person in the building that is their most trusted person. We did just put out a connection survey, and that did come through. And so I think that speaks volumes just to the simple fact of teachers and, you know, staff and faculty building relationships. Would you guys agree that the teams that are enforcing these are also trying to build those relationships, or do you not sense that in your experience?
It depends on who you talk to. It's like a
Okay.
mix of both. Like some people can have really good relationships with the administrators, and then some people don't at all. And it's kind of hard to figure out why. It could just be that we expect them to not be good, so we like, but it also could be like something else that's their fault.
Sure.
Like I don't really know.
Tough to tell.
Yeah.
I see it on a daily basis with Miss Springer. She's so sweet, and you know, she's always like walking around with the same student, and I can really see that like they've built a bond, and that like they trust each other, and like I'm like, even as an outsider, like I truly appreciate that. Like, so yeah, I agree with that statement that they are doing their job.
There is current language in the high school, again, handbook, that it employs a system of restorative practices. And, I mean, it's like a little, so it's already kind of there, to be, you know, it's already stated that, you know, it allows students due process and access to services. Restorative practice helps to open conversations, hold all parties responsible and accountable. So that would be something that somebody's already talked about, because it's in there already. And so what does that look like? Like maybe formalizing that system
Yeah.
would be,
Well, I think that came out with the vaping and stuff like that, but the reality of it is a lot of kids will just take the suspension.
yeah. And that's the thing,
Versus
is like,
taking-
I think step one is making them care enough about the community that they've harmed it. You know, and that's
That's what I was
what
saying.
takes,
Creating the
Yeah.
connection.
that's what
culture.
takes the the
That's
word.
the crux of it,
That's
right?
the crux of it.
Yeah.
And then it's like, you can work on yourself with the vape, if it's sort of vaping, and it's like, go to something about that issue, but then really thinking about the harm that was caused to your friends and your teacher and whoever, anyway. So like, but it's already, I would support putting forward a recommendation for formalizing restorative practices to be used, but it's a long,
What do the teachers think? Like you,
We were just kind of whispering
Yeah.
that. Years ago, we had restorative justice training, and it kind of just,
what, was it the circles, or?
I don't remember, it's been
Oh.
at least 10 years.
Why do you think that is?
I think people just revert back to what they know, I don't know,
Yeah.
it just wasn't.
Yeah, there's something to be said for that.
Yeah.
I also
Because-
just feel like I vented earlier, is there's always been like a lack of transparency and trust and full conversations and communication for some reason, so it's like human beings are very advanced creatures, and I always say to all my students, if you're very black and white, you're gonna end up emotionally black and blue, is that you need to keep it like high level and formative. You need to be sincere, you need to be transparent, and what's good for student A might be horrible for student B, and if you're not having conversations and documentation with it, and not litigious documentation, just like, hey, we had this conversation, like I myself, like Andrew Propetier, when I was in high school, my parents were very not involved on purpose. They were great parents, but whenever they got involved, I would make everything blow up. So sophomore year of high school, they agreed to not get involved at all. So if you called home, they'd be like, Andrew will handle it, and then everything got better. So that's what I mean about people are sometimes counterintuitive and different, and we don't seem to have that conversation. So every time you have a student in your class in the high school, it's like, I don't even know, like, what is this? Like, I've had so many times where I'm just like, I have no data, the student, I find out like through like the grapevine that there would have been this great thing to help them that I didn't know of, and then the parents aren't talked to, like, or if the parents are talked to, they're talked to, they're not talked with. They're told like, oh, Andrew is this kid who's doing all this stuff, so here's what we're doing, instead of being like, hey, what do you think? And then the discipline is never prescriptive. Like, I know when I was younger, I had to be a bartender and a bouncer, and one of the things that always worked well with discipline in those environments was I always let people know what was coming. If you keep doing this, this is gonna happen, and I've never really participated in that in the high school. It's always been like, don't do this, and then the next conversation is, why'd you do that? Instead of being like, hey, Andrew, like, we let you know this was coming, come on, let's go. Like, you just keep doing it. So those are what I would have liked to see with restorative, practice and stuff like that.
Do you think the faculty soured on the concept if it was brought back as an initiative?
It wouldn't hurt to rebrand it, I
Right.
would say that.
Yeah, that's what your nonverbals
Is-
were telling me.
Yeah.
So is that lack of transparency, is that between teachers and, in your case, the high school administration? Is it the high school and the district, or where is that lack of, I'm just wanting to suss that out.
It was like all over, like there was,
Is it just due to administration changes on both local and
Yeah.
district-wide?
Historically speaking, if I may, Andrew, and you tell me if I'm not hearing you correctly, our teachers have brought forward that prior to like the change in administration, just through the building and in the district, that things were withheld, really important information about students that would help to inform how the teachers are responding to them, like if there was homelessness or if there was, whatever it be, that could really help them understand and be another listening and supportive ear. So one thing we've heard loud and clear from our faculty over the last couple of years is, that transparency is really important, and we would be in full agreement. And I think just like mechanisms to do that, within law, like legality, appropriateness, I think is where we're trying to live right now, and branching minds is one avenue that it's like, this is full transparency, so everybody can see the interventions and the communications and whatnot. Right now, what administration has been trying to do is If there is an item that's really different, you know, than something, you know, more general, we like to sit all of the teachers in question in front of us and have that discussion. Hey, here's what's going on, just wanna let you know. In the MTSS process, you know, I ask the parents' permission if I can put it in their intervention form that goes to the teachers, like, hey, yeah, I'm just using homeless as an example. Are you comfortable with me letting the teachers know in this form in writing, be mindful that this is the student's situation? And most of the time they say yes, so we've been trying to up that, but historically speaking, our teachers have reported just kind of like just a lack of trust because of a lack of transparency. And that has definitely been pretty forefront.
I think what the next step of that, right, is, okay, so the teacher gets, and I completely understand that we have new administration that's working on setting new practices. I think the goal of this conversation is to put that framework there so that everyone's having the same conversation. And so that, because we know we have good administrators in the buildings and we know we have good administration, like we're trying to move that consistently forward.
Yeah.
And so I think what would happen in my mind if I got that information as a teacher is I would think, okay, I know this about the student now, and the student's acting up in my classroom.
Now what?
Now what?
Yep.
Do they get disciplined the same
Yes.
as somebody I don't know that information about?
Yep,
What
yep.
does that look like?
Mhm.
Like, you know, like, and that's where that you bias the teacher towards that student in a positive way, but like, what is that expectation change there, and what does that look like? And I think that's where, to me, having some sort of training and understanding can help individuals in the moment know what to do and how to work with students to have them be
It
successful.
comes back to training and understanding,
Yeah.
because it's,
And common training.
that's why when you hear matrix, it was like, oh, no matrix, but really seeking to understand, you know, every behavior is a form of communication, and if we just live with that, trying to unpack that, but really giving our staff the tools to really truly understand that. Even if we go with PBIS, it starts with the classroom teachers. They have to start with the expectations of their, you know, so sometimes if things get kicked back to me, I'm like, no, that's like a teacher-led thing, and, you know, constantly teaching. It's really complicated
Yep.
and hard to be really consistent.
Well, and the thing that baffles me the most about K-12 education is how hard it is to get you all professional development. It costs a lot of money to do free trainings in this district, and so I think, thinking about budget time and what we're trying to move forward, like, we're 2 years out now, because it's not in this budget, you know, like, and so it's trying to think of what can be done now while students are getting, you know, just like, and I'm sure it might be better, but like, they're still getting disproportionately disciplined based on race and ethnicity. Like, the data shows that still, we haven't seen a huge improvement, like, as far as what we've been looking at, and so it's trying to figure out what do we do now in the meantime when we don't have time or the resources to give professional development to the teachers to teach them this huge system that half of them will not like because it's called something that they
I
used to
did
use.
say rebranded.
You know what I mean though? Like I'm a realist. Like just saying like, okay, we're gonna implement restorative justice is not gonna solve this problem. So what I was hoping we would learn from this committee is like what could be done to try to move this forward and get some consistency for students and some transparency for students.
I do think the three recommendations are what would create that. It's doing the PBS training, consistent code of conduct, formalizing these restorative practices. Those would be my three big recommendations.
What about a different
create
system to report, a different
Well,
reporting system?
that would come out of PBIS.
Okay.
That's part of,
So
that
you
system.
wrap that into that,
The
because,
data-
Yeah.
the
because
data-
I think that was the
the
one.
data is part of that.
Okay, because that's
Yeah.
one thing
No,
that
I
I think
agree.
we've made very clear the whole time is Aspen is not the answer. It doesn't, it's
No.
not adequate.
Aspen wasn't really designed to do that. It was
Right.
designed, anytime you use a system that's not quite designed for that, you're kind of retrofitting and it doesn't quite work. And there's even inconsistency on how things are written in there, and I've read lots of, Joe and I have read lots of write-ups, but to me, it'd still be like those major issues that have led to something like suspension, that has to go in there because of Department of Ed. But all these other things don't have to be in that system. But somehow they were given the message years ago that everything had to go, at least in some places, they were given the message that everything has to go in there.
Yeah.
And I think that's created interesting data. It's not,
I mean, that was the clear message.
I
The clear
figured it
message
was,
Yeah.
just from
You know,
what
when
you
I
said.
worked at Davis Middle School for 6 years, and that, I mean, that's what we did, because, you know, don't think you're gonna come to a team meeting with nothing in Aspen. You
Yeah,
know, you need to
exactly.
have a
When I
good
first came,
10,
that was
12,
the
15.
message too.
Yeah.
And I was
mean,
like,
it's-
and I was all about making plans and supporting the child. They're like, where's the discipline referrals? So I'm like, all right, stop documenting everything, because I didn't want it to also be like something that stuck with them. They did something in second grade and, you know, so I was very, but yes, that was the message when I started as well.
Just playing devil's advocate, we have a lot to manage, at least at the high school, like, if we add another platform, I can imagine.
Yeah, and I don't think we need
Yeah,
a platform.
And I think that, you know, for tracking purposes, when I think about the deans, are they to be looking at two different things,
No,
or?
I think that you could take Aspen and still use it as your system, but be more consistent about things are written up or
Right,
what
right.
your coding is.
And from what I
Things like
understand,
that.
we can change what the
Yes.
code, all of
Right.
that, okay,
You do that.
Right,
yeah, okay.
that's a pretty consistent thing that most people have done, we just haven't done it here. And
Yeah.
I can go out on a limb and say, what's not even going out on a limb, I'll suspect that the reason why they want a lot of those discipline referrals is because then what would happen is that information would be collected and it would be put in front of somebody and they'd say, this kid needs to go to DA.
Or somebody needs some sort of,
Yeah,
needs a one-on-one, needs.
yeah,
What is
it was,
I mean,
it was to
tracking
kind of.
documentation is.
Oh, you couldn't ask for help, you could not ask for help if you did not have disciplinary referrals.
Mhm. And I think that system has changed a little bit, so the need for that is different, like,
But I don't necessarily think you've changed the mindset, because no one's really been told not
Correct.
to do it.
Does
I
anyone
agree.
in the
I
district
agree with you,
oversee
I agree with you,
all the Aspen inputs?
I'm sorry.
Does anyone in the district oversee all of that? No.
The
No,
other
it's
thing-
done by
Disciplines exclusively?
Yeah.
The other thing I think too personally is that we need like two different frameworks of like data collecting for who to then go talk to. Like, you know, it would be cool if like in Aspen, there was a record of the teacher they had when they had this issue, and it doesn't have to be any notes, and just then that teacher can go meet with that other teacher, or can go talk to the guidance counselor, like instead of getting a perfect program for like labeling and data collection, just logistics, and then the data collecting would be conversations with people.
Do you-
Because
do you guys
like,
have, like,
no
the ability-
technology is ever gonna solve a conversation.
No, cause it's another system, you're talking about a
Yeah,
not a technical system, there needs to be a system within the school
Yeah.
that you can access someone
like,
else.
just
So
a
when you
data
see
record.
if a student had a discipline, so if somebody had a discipline infraction in ninth grade,
Yeah,
and you look in their Aspen, you see nothing? You see just what they put
Currently,
in, but not who?
Currently, the teachers historically don't have access to that.
Okay, so you see nothing.
What was,
You don't have their,
Is that just
their,
an
jo-
Aspen?
their conduct history, you can't see it? Or you can't
Yeah.
see the teacher who,
We
Like
can
wrote
just
up.
see the infraction,
yep.
and we can't see like any meetings or anything like that.
You couldn't see like
Okay.
follow-up, you can just know that like Sue had.
Depends. Ironically, I can see currently nothing. Like, so I don't even have the conduct referral tab in Aspen for some reason, so I don't even see anything other than my students.
And is there are there teams that talk about shared students?
No.
Is there,
Shared students?
like, is there ever like, is there
At
ever
the high
like,
school, it's really
yeah.
hard, because like
There's-
even
yeah.
establishing consistency unless they're in like a program, for
Right.
example, like a special ed program, it's tough. We have common planning time where teachers, do their best to group it by grade level
Yeah.
and by section and
Right,
compare
okay.
student work, but it's so
but
varied.
they're not talking
students-
about like the
Yeah.
grade 9, the grade 9 team's not getting together and talking about like what,
I mean,
what's
that
going
could-
on.
Because it
Behavior
fluctuates and it
intervention team or-
changes every year.
That could be something with the framework that we customize CPT time. It's like, you know, it's not, we haven't done it, but maybe that could happen, like the framework.
So
Like
for,
then you could meet with teachers in your department about students you had in common,
Yeah.
having that data. You could do that, like, but we haven't historically, cause it's like, you know, it's like every problem, it's always nuance. Like, because A wasn't there, then B didn't work, you know, so until we get that, like,
What is the one thing?
you know what
so
it's
middle
talking
school
about.
has
Until you get like a
students?
framework going, then you can kind of push against it and
Yeah.
start having problems, like, you can't,
Well, I think this is kind of going along with what we were talking about with academics and curriculum and student work, is using CPT time more to be looking at student work, or using CPT time to look more at student behavior, or, I mean, that's kind of what I
What do
hear
they
too,
what do
it's
you
sort of
use
that time.
What do they do now? What do you use that time for now?
basically like ride like like overarching like goals, kind of like this committee, like you're talking about like the goal, but you really don't have the framework to push against the goal. So like right now, my department, we're working on getting a framework and
So
getting it established so that we can push against like what we're actually supposed to be doing during CPT time.
Yeah, so theoretically, and I say that because it fluctuates, like, depending on the needs of each. That time should be spent reviewing ILT notes, which is the department chairs sit with administrators and talk about larger things like ride regulations coming down, more, nuanced things throughout the school. And then they should be working with one another on aligning and collaborating and calibrating their work, looking at student work, whatnot. The English department is adopting a high-quality curriculum, so right now that's like the whole next couple of years will be focused on that. Science is doing the same. Others are really sitting down and looking at what assignments are you giving, what test is coming up, does our midterm look
So
the
they
same?
don't have time to do this.
Not in CPT
No.
time.
No, that's what I was
Yeah.
curious about. If we said,
Yeah.
okay, like we're gonna do this instead, they'd say, no, we
They'd
don't
be
have
like,
time to do that.
what do you want
Yeah.
us to focus
Yeah.
on is
Well,
probably
I don't
what
think it
we
could
would
be
get.
a this instead. I
Right.
think it's more of a looking at, maybe you look at more of a more formalized we have an MTSS team at the high school. They are meeting on kids. Not everybody know that, but can we make that a little more transparent, a little bit more
What does MTSS stand for?
multi-tiered
Multi-system.
support, system of supports.
Yeah.
So a student who's having more difficulty than the average student may be coming to that table to help problem solve, as a problem solving team to create plans for that student.
So,
And then depending on what's needed, different people are called in. School psychologists, I get called in at times for certain issues, it kind of depends on what's in front of us. So that does exist, I just think we could be doing more of it.
so if I-
And that doesn't mean all the teachers always are involved.
So if I hear what you're
Some.
saying is, during common planning time, your department's getting together, looking at the standards, and like,
Mhm.
big picture, that you're not sitting around saying, all right, I got little Johnny in my class.
No, not usually.
But you'd be the only teacher in your department to have them, right? You
Right.
don't have the math and the science and
Right.
the PE teachers, so
Right.
there's no team
Oh,
to
true.
talk
There's
to.
no
There's
team.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, and we have like 15 teachers per department for the most part, and they meet on two, we have to split it in half because we can't get all
Just like
15
it's a
offline
model.
at the same
Yeah.
time.
The model doesn't support it, is what
Yeah,
you're saying.
yeah.
Just
Yeah,
like-
that's what I was, yeah,
But the
that's,
same thing
yeah.
happens with
Yeah.
two different middle schools
It's
that
like every
have,
fourth
one
day.
has teams, one doesn't.
Yeah.
But I also think like the model could support it if like,
Well, if you make
eventually you get somewhere, like you have a framework, we adopted the curriculum, we got that, then you could literally be like, look forward to CPT time, because you'd be like, man, I got this kid who's just not engaged in my class, and you had them last year, what did you do? And then maybe I come and observe your class and see how you interact with students and learn that, hey, maybe I could do that too. And then that's like what CPT in theory can be and might end up being, but historically you gotta remember the CPT time came about through like just department meetings 10 years ago that was just like, hey, let's just meet and talk. And then it became like ride and edict of common planning time to look at student work and look at pedagogical practice, and it kind of melded into other things, and it became like ride. So it could happen, it's like if you get the framework going and then you look at common planning time to like solve issues for the students, so it could be, I don't think it's impossible. I definitely think it's
It's very, in Davidson Middle School, it was organic, like you were on
Yeah.
teams, we all had the
Yeah.
same students. And, we could be supposed to be talking about whatever, but like, hey, I just had a problem with Andrew again, and like, and it just kind of just came out, like, what do you guys do with this
Set up.
kid, like, and.
But that's
we just
natural that
spent-
it happens at the middle schools or
Right.
elementary, it's natural
Much
that it
as-
doesn't happen at the high school.
Yeah.
Because
But that-
It's
not
not
set.
1,400
structured
kids,
that
and
way.
that one kid, there's no, two kids would probably have the same exact schedule.
Right.
Yep.
Well, exactly, and I think that's why I hear what you're saying, Andrew, I would also say that might be more like a one-on-one conversation instead of during that time.
Oh, definitely.
Do you know what I'm saying?
I
Like,
agree.
because like we've illuminated, we only have 80 minutes to do a lot of work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, Lucy.
Thank you. You kind of touched upon this, and I just want to get a feeling about something. Because you had asked, is there someone that oversees the whole thing for the district? Is that something that we think would help consistency if there's a district level position of someone that looks at everything that's entered into discipline for Aspen? Is that a,
I was just wondering what the structure was, of, because we're talking about consistency, and so looking, is there one set of eyes that looks at everyone across, or even all the elementary schools, then the 2 middle schools or high schools? Or even looking at, again, I don't work through K through 12, but even having some team that works together, even one person from each school who brings, I don't know, I'm just,
yeah,
to me, it seems hard to be consistent if there's not one consistent person looking at all the data. Because again, when we looked at it, I think it was a couple months ago, when we broke it down by school, it was so
Right.
vastly different.
Right. Is there one, from the, I guess the administrators and teachers, is there one consistent person at each school that looks at all of the Aspen discipline data?
I would think, that's what.
No.
Is it the
At the
principals?
elementaries, it would be the principal.
The principal?
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
look at every single thing that gets put into Aspen on the
Oh,
discipline?
yeah,
list?
absolutely. I have to post it.
Okay,
We look at it at the high school a little bit different, where we do track the data, our MTSS team does, which consists of all of our administrators, aside from Shivali actually, because if something gets appealed, we want
It
her
has
to
to
be
go
that
through,
next
yeah.
step, and so Eric, myself, and the 2 deans, all of our school counselors, our school psychologist, school social worker, you know, reading interventionists, other interventionists, that team follows behavioral, academic, and attendance data that then informs our decisions on who to support. But we don't necessarily track trends as much. Like every 6 to 8 weeks per Rob Mezzinotti's directive, we do look at more global data and we talk about that. We actually just recently did it last week, but not in like the way that this is being expressed. So it's more like, we gotta get helping the students, what are our students, you know, looking like, who's in the most need, let's get their families in, let's get the students at the table, how do we support them? And that's like, even that is a tough, it's a tough feat with how much we have to, you know,
so
sift
you don't
through.
necessarily look at every time different teachers put in things, there's not one consistent team of people that say, well, this teacher called it this and this teacher called it that, can we
No.
come to an agreement that this is not consistent and
Well, I
what
think-
is consistent?
I
Not
would think
quite like
that
that.
until you have a framework
Yeah.
for them to compare it to, it
Yeah.
would be hard to even do that
Yeah.
analysis.
They're responding
If that makes sense
to
to you. Yeah.
referrals, but yeah.
Okay.
Cause it
Yeah.
wouldn't be the teacher's, I don't wanna say fault, but how would they,
Right, like,
how would they
yeah,
write it
you don't know, you
consistently
don't
if they
know.
don't have that framework which to write it?
Right,
Like the
So-
coding.
Yeah,
Thinking of
like
the coding.
coding, like this is
Could
what
they
we're all
code?
gonna agree that this means and things like that.
They could, if the teachers coded it, the same thing, and then the discipline person chose what it was, that might be more
One way.
consistent. Saying like, this is what this is, and the teacher could just like write the facts of what happened. You know,
I think that's
maybe.
getting back to the same common definitions of vocabulary.
Yeah,
yeah,
We keep
right,
coming
right,
back
right.
to like
Yeah.
writing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So, I have, again, the recommendations to the school committee, I'm just gonna repeat them, which the first one was to adopt, cause we're running out of time and I don't
Yep.
wanna.
We are.
Adopt the positive behavior intervention support PBS system to create a common language and definitions, consistent code of conduct, including a two behavior framework with a range of options, formulating the use of restorative practices, and I wrote rebranded, maybe changing what it's called. I understand, that kind of visceral response.
I
Which-
don't personally have that, so I
But,
don't think we necessarily need to rebrand it. It's
I
been
think
10
we should
years.
call it what
People have
it is. You
Restorative
branded
practice,
it,
yeah.
language is important.
Okay.
Does that come in a order of
I put that in order of what normally you would,
how you?
how it normally be deployed, yes.
Can we,
And I say formalizing, cause I do think I see practices like this,
There's pockets of it.
it's pockets everywhere, it's just not consistent.
is it possible to put in more of a time frame of this should happen
Sure.
within the next year? And this should happen in the next, I don't know if that's possible, that's a question, cause I think, at least me, from my perspective of being on the school committee, if I hear this needs to happen at this point, and then, and it's gonna,
Yeah.
and give me some guidelines of this is the time frame we're looking, because things that cost money, like Erin said, we're in budget season now for next year already, so things that aren't in front of us probably won't get into this next budget. So
So I think the PBI asked if we're sending some people to training, that's just this year, he has money budgeted for that. There might be more to add people to that, we'd have to ask,
if we wanted
Mr.
to extend it
Mazzanotti.
to the
Yeah,
high school.
to
I
other
think,
folks.
I personally feel that's important to somehow find the money to do that this year if we can. out of this budget, but, so I mean, I would
Agreed.
support that recommendation, but
So maybe,
That would be the immediate.
send
that
me
would
a-
be the immediate thing, I
Immediate.
would think.
Yeah.
So that you
But-
can start rolling it out before September.
I mean,
Right, and then I think consistent code of conduct, that's actually, it shouldn't, it doesn't necessarily cost money, it's like, it's people
I
like
think
this
like
working
gathering
together.
up the
Yeah. Who
And
works
then
in
the next piece,
summer?
restorative practices with
administrators.
Administrators.
So even looking at what can administrators do over the summer to have a rollout in
There's only,
September.
there's certain days that they're required to be here and other days they're
Yeah.
not.
So if we
So,
were on a team and we knew ahead of time, I think we could
Yes.
schedule to say, all right, everybody, July,
So that would be like the
20th.
MTSS team at the high school meet, do they all work during the summer?
No, just the administrators on
Just
the
the
team.
administrators?
Yeah, and, you know, if we knew there
But
was an
unless
initiative.
you could get started maybe.
Yeah,
and-
if we knew there was an initiative, we could then organize it, cause there's a certain amount of days that we each get off contractually, and some people, you know, I usually stay through July because there's summer school, but that's cause I'm an academic, you know what I mean? Others come in other times, so if we knew about the initiative, I think we can organize our time to be together, but I think the most important people in the conversation would be Eric, Amanda, and Jess, cause they're in it, you know?
so I added, send the additional 3 high
With the other
school,
principals,
high
yeah.
school administrators to the training.
Okay, this year,
Yep.
this May,
Mhm.
okay.
And I, as I said, I can look it up, but I think it was like $256 a person.
and it might even be a discount, we get 5, sometimes that happens when you send 5
Yeah,
or more,
exactly.
the price per person goes down.
Goes down.
Sometimes, I'm just throwing it out.
And that's,
We have
that
money.
training, that
May
training
fif-
is
May
provided
14th,
by?
I think it's May 14th and 15th or 15th and 16th.
Who's the training provided by?
New England PBS.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
15th.
I was
Oh, no,
just-
it's
I
alright.
was just, I wanted to
No,
get a
you
little
made
more
me think for a
specific
second.
May
if we could do
15th
it.
and 16th.
May 15th and 16th.
And so the next, your next
And then
bullet point,
was the consistent code of conduct to your behavior framework with a range of options. That I think we could accomplish by the end of next year. Or,
and
Maybe sooner.
how is that accomplished?
I think you need to get a different group of people, the people that are just doing the discipline, to create that. And a draft of it, and then you get committee members like our students involved and our teachers involved, so that they can propose at it.
Why couldn't they be part of the creation of it? Like, I know that that's a philosophy change, but like if we're talking about trust and transparency,
Mm-hmm.
like obviously the administrators will like be able to explain things and whatnot, but like I do think that to have student buy-in, to have students and parents at the table, in creating something about discipline specifically, like obviously we're not academics, I'm not gonna tell the science teachers how, but like this is something that really fundamentally affects the whole community. Like that's not.
I'm just gonna,
appropriate.
I think that having people try to, it's exactly what happened with this committee, trying to create something from scratch without having them to look at is gonna be problematic. I think you need a draft of something for people to comment on, to poke at, to say, oh, what does this mean, and question.
Yeah, I don't think you need 30 people to write something that's hard, but like if the chairs, if you all wrote something and put it forward or took examples from different districts and put it forward to get feedback on, like, that's a way you could push it forward.
That's kinda what I'm saying though, like create that draft so that that group can, creates it to then
Personalize
have
it for
people
us.
can look at it, yeah. And we have looked at lots of different things in this committee. But I think if we had a draft, like if this committee was given a draft of this is the kind of behavioral framework and matrix that we would like, something like this, and all set down and only concentrated on that, we could accomplish that. Right, cause you had something to kinda go off of.
I think that the more administrators that you get developing it, the more buy-in you're gonna have district-wide, that it actually doesn't fall apart like we've had things fall apart in the past.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to communicate.
So is
So-
the school committee recommendation that gets, for lack of a better word, mandated to be done by the administration?
Yeah, I think that's that's what we're,
Is that like
I
a
think that-
summer initiative,
That's
like you said, a summer
Let's
initiative
use the
that
word
has to happen?
required, it might be softer, but yes, we all should be required to
Volunteer.
work on that.
Yeah, I picked my word on purpose.
I know you did.
It's been a year.
Yeah.
We've had this data about these students for over 2.5 years about this problem, and I know it's not a people problem, but like, it is challenging to not have anything moved forward. Like, we've changed nothing since we received that data, and so I think that's where I'm concerned about the timeline and basically the year that we've lost in this progress.
I guess I'm gonna push back on that, because I do think the ministers have changed quite a bit. Even the time that I've been here, I've noticed differences in how people are talking about the issues. I also think there was a problem, and I talked about this before, there was a problem with the data to begin with, in that, yes, you're disproportionate, absolutely, we need to change our practices, but it's not looking at how people got that discipline. It didn't talk about how many times an issue may have occurred that ended up in that suspension. We've talked about this
Yeah.
before, that some of that data was,
It's a starting point
it's a
for
wee bit
conversation.
skewed, but it's an
There-
important conversation.
You know, like anytime you look at data to go to root causes, you know,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
We could train to remove a range of options to be created.
so we had a lot of questions
Do we
around the
take-
data, but
I
ultimately,
mean,
the
don't need to-
consistency is the number one thing that we agreed that we need to work on.
bad data in is bad data out too, so that part of it is important of figuring out what you're
Yeah,
putting in
there's-
to put out.
Exactly, that's exactly what I'm.
But also, like, I don't,
Yeah.
I'm not
for
saying there
me
isn't a problem.
personally, the data's clear, like, even with bad data in, it is very clear that we are disproportionately disciplining
And I think
students
we all
of
agree,
color
yeah.
in this
No,
district.
no,
Like, we
I
know
don't
that.
think anyone
Yeah.
disagreed about
Okay,
that.
just checking.
No, but I also want, there also was a lack of, how did it get there?
Yeah.
That's what we talked about. I know, Andrew, I remember you talking about, like, not having a conversation. Well, how did that happen? What occurred before? We don't know. So that's another piece. But no, we all agree there's an issue.
So as far as
Otherwise, we wouldn't sit here.
the written recommendation.
Yeah, what do you want me to do? I said, consistent code of conduct, including a tiered behavior framework with the range of options created by the school administrators by when?
What is
What's a
June.
reasonable date?
June of next
This
year?
June?
Yes.
Oh, I thought,
Oh, this June.
this June?
Why not? No, but like,
You
that's a
think that's
genuine question,
reasonable?
because
It's
like,
not
what are
gonna
the
be reasonable with
barriers
testing
and
season
what?
stuff. We're not gonna be able to be
You're not
pulled
gonna
out
be
to
able to
work
do
it.
it.
Summer.
Can we do it
They work in
by
the summer.
September?
We work in the summer.
Well, the admins, the principals do, but they won't be
That's
able to
who
get their
will be-
teacher feedback or anything. You know, like, I'm just trying to figure out, like, how do you?
Well, I think a draft of that could be
That'd be
created
step
by a
one.
certain amount of time.
I mean, I will say at the high school, I've definitely seen the needle moving towards the positive a lot by administration and the teachers and the students. Like, the culture has been shifting and changing the right direction, so I mean, it might not show it in the committee notes or like anything official, but I have definitely seen a lot of things moving towards the positive,
That's awesome.
so.
And I feel like we need the structure and the framework. You know, like,
Oh, I don't.
like there's the people piece, and that's amazing, and I know we have amazing people here, but
Yeah.
also, you know, like, that's where I'm always stuck on this, is like, how do we move forward those pieces,
So-
because
Well,
then.
what if we write it this way? We draft a consistent code of conduct, including tiered behaviors, behavior supports, all those things, range of options created by the school administrators by September?
I'd say by September.
Cause
then
we
go
could do
for
that,
fe-
maybe part of
Then we
admin
can ask
retreat.
for feedback.
So the administrators who work over the summer can start the process over the summer.
And that we could
And then you
possibly
get the
share with
feedback from the
teachers, like on
teachers.
orientation days.
So then you could talk about, and I think then a reasonable would be, I think you have to get another committee for parents and students to review that draft, right? That's a big piece of this, that they're part of that
I
process.
mean, we can ask teachers to volunteer. I don't know if we wanna go there. I mean, we have some people that would, but I don't, I'm
just trying to put some
How do we
timelines in
formalize
here.
that? Yep.
Yeah.
So I think by September, but I think to get a committee, I think you're gonna need at least 3 meetings, would be my guess, of that group who's gonna review the draft to clean it up. So what is a reasonable timeline for that?
Is that by December or?
I was thinking like, be right before Thanksgiving, whatever that
Okay,
is, November 15th.
before November, by November 15th. Okay. Is that, I don't know all of your schedules and I know you have
I mean,
variety
I'm just
issues
trying to
on
think,
many
if we have a
other
tighter timeline, it might be a little bit easier.
things. Okay.
So we
Well,
have
it's
to
also-
pick a
it's-
September, October, November meeting, is that?
Yeah, that's kinda what I'm thinking.
One meeting a month to.
Yeah, to clean it up and then people look at it a little bit more, but they have a draft to look at, they have something really concrete to look at.
I don't know, the other thing too, is there any way to get more student involvement, to do like the meetings like they do in Vision of the Graduate, like during the school day, so the kids kind of
Yeah.
get out of class? to,
That's
like,
kinda
go
what
to
I'm
the
wondering, if we couldn't do that in
committee,
September,
you know,
October.
give them give them that carrot that they like, you know, to get more students, like, than them having to come here on their, late at night on their own
Yep.
time. Cause Vision of the Graduate has a very decent, like, walked by those meetings in the media center and they have a nice kind of sampling of everything, so maybe a time frame. Cause I agree you want parent and student buy-in and also not only buy-in, but like forming of it, like getting to have input.
How is that possible at the elementary level? Is it possible to do that during the day? Or-
I mean, I'm hearing, you know, student input, I would love, Parker, wouldn't you love to have input? I would love input from honestly, the lens of an elementary student, because
Yeah, I
they
agree.
see things, they're so insightful, and they see things that adults don't see. So,
Is that more like a student council
I
type thing?
think it would be probably, yeah, like our fifth grade leadership team or something, you know?
Maybe
That was
they-
my next question,
and
does
then
every
maybe they
elementary
send a
have a
rep.
student council that?
Yeah,
meets
maybe a
regularly?
rep can,
And maybe they meet as a school, but they can send a rep to the larger group with
Yeah.
their notes?
Yeah,
Does that make sense? I'm just trying to make it
and they are very vocal
some
about
type of
what's
structure.
fair and they have a voice, and if they help build something, I think it's gonna matter to them.
Yeah, it'll matter more, of course.
Yeah.
So what was, well, I don't wanna interrupt this
I'm
thought
trying
process
to
of
figure
this
this out.
one.
To really draft and make amendments
By
by
November
November
15th.
15th.
And then what was the third, you had a third, it's kind of a three-tiered.
The last one is
recommendation.
formalizing the use of restorative practices. I think that's gonna need a whole nother year.
If there's already
Formalizing.
PD set up for next year, which I
Yeah, we
assume
can.
there,
Yeah,
I assume there is on
Yeah.
the docket,
It-
yeah,
required MLL training.
yeah,
So I'm thinking the year after that.
probably.
But it does give you,
Unless we
but
look at
does
try and train the
or-
trainer.
Train the
well,
trainer,
but it
yeah.
gives you next year though to get people trained,
Yeah,
Or
trained.
send people to, yeah, and then.
I
train-
think we
train the
start filtering it out like almost like marketing a little bit, you know what I mean? Like talking about it, maybe sending articles out and just get people's, but
Or
yes,
you pay
the
people.
MLL is gonna be, right, that's gonna be a
That's
big thing.
So
That's
respectfully,
gonna be all the time.
like, that's every year. It's
Something
right to
else.
read, it's
I know,
whatever.
I know,
Prioritizing how students are disciplined needs
I
to
know.
be something that we prioritize. And so what that looks like is resources, right? It's giving incentives to the teachers to do it outside of their time. It's paying for subs to come in so they can do it during the school. Like, we know how to do it, it's just allocating those resources, and if we're allocating those resources. The problem is we've already missed this year. So it's that's the tricky part.
So back to the
I have it.
third.
I have it. I think I have it. So this is how I did it. So I have adopt the positive behavior intervention support system to create common language again. And then underneath that, as a first action step, send the additional 3 high school administrators to PBS training this May. The next bullet is create a consistent code of conduct, including a tiered behavior framework with a range of options. First piece under that, drafted, created by the school administrators by September. The next piece is create school-based student representatives. I was trying to figure out how to put that, Carolyn. You know, like
yeah, and each school can.
school-based
I mean,
student
at the
reps.
elementary level, we all have some sort of leadership team, so I mean, I don't know about middle school. How-
And then the next piece I wrote, committee of teachers, students, and families to review the draft and make amendments by November 15th. Are those the steps?
Are all the elementary principals trained in the PBIS thing?
I think some have been, some have not.
So I think everyone,
So then we need to
we need to do the
expand
middle
the-
school principals, whatever, I feel like to get consistency, like you need to have.
I
The
don't
other elementary
disagree.
school principals.
So this May, then we'll have to look, send elementary principals
I feel like it's
next
easier
year.
for
I don't think we
elementary,
can
I
send
think
them
it's
by
such a philosophical change for secondary. It's gonna be,
Well, they can,
Yeah.
We can start there, right? They have to
Yeah.
learn what it is and understand what it is to be able to hate it. And then if they hate it, then we'll figure out a different thing to do, but like, we have to start somewhere.
So, I don't think we can send everyone this May,
Why?
cause then you have every building administrator out on the same day.
It's, it's those 2 days and that's it.
Yeah,
There's
but I
no-
think there's probably another training, I will just have to look it up.
I wonder if there's one in the
I
summer.
just was thinking, cause
Yeah.
then we can help cover the elementary schools.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? Like if we send everybody out in the that's not gonna be helpful to the district.
Do they do it during the summer at all?
They might.
They
I
might.
can look it up. But when I just put it for right now, send elementary principals to PBS training.
Plan to
Plan.
Sam.
Yeah, and then Create a consistent code, draft to be created, create school-based student representatives, committee of teachers, students, families to review the draft and make amendments by November 15th. Formalizing these restorative practice, send key members to training. I just had an idea. I think we should send them to training next year so they can start working like a train the trainer.
Is that a key staff person at each school? So one from each school? And where's that training, do we know where that's held?
It's all over the place. I know I got mine out of Providence, but we'd have to look up.
Is that something we can research?
What I can do is I can add to this.
Okay,
I'll research the PBS training, I'll research restorative justice training, I'll put it
to put the specifics in.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll add it in.
Does that,
I'm gonna put that in notes.
so far, does that sound
everyone's
reasonable to
okay.
everybody? Is there anything else that we're missing that we wanna add, that we wanna?
Person per building?
At least one person,
Yeah.
I think I'll say, that's right, what,
Per
send key
school.
members for each school. I just said send, because there might be some more from the middle school and more from the high school depending, right?
Right, well, you can have the elementary, like, do you
One
want
or
maybe
two.
only one
And
person
don't you
that
also need to
went, you know?
prioritize the
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
trained who you want to make the document that we're all gonna push against, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, shouldn't the experts be the ones constructing it, that it will then be pushed against by the teachers, the parents, and the
Right,
students?
that's why the draft is being created by the school administrators.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
But
that's
shouldn't, to
exactly-
make sure those are the administrators who get priority to go for training right
Correct.
away.
It looks like there's a lot of different ways that you can
There's
do
lots of ways to
the
do it.
PBIS training, like the thing that you all are talking about is the leadership forum,
Mm-hmm.
but then there's also like trainers available to hire, to bring here, there's, you know, like, it looks like there's a variety of ways.
The New England PBS is pretty robust, that's why I'm not concerned
Yeah.
about getting people to trainings, and so is restorative justice training, there's a
Yeah.
lot of them.
Yeah.
And I'm just putting to note that I'll add specific details on training,
Okay.
so that we're not keeping people who to do that.
Yep.
Alright,
Summer might be, well, I don't wanna speak for anybody. I don't mind doing things in the summer, but summer might be more ideal, and then if we're gonna, as a team, create the framework, it'd be nice to have it fresh, and then,
so,
that's the way
Yeah.
So is there
Got it.
anything additional that anybody feels we should add, that we should expound upon? I know it's getting late, but it's 6:13.
So by November 15th, we'll have this basic framework done.
done, yep.
How does it get rolled out to teachers?
Well, once I have it, then we could put another, and then deployed,
Yeah.
the principals would do it at a faculty meeting, typically, if that's something that's get deployed. I'd added that, principals will review in a faculty meeting.
But then does that require more training then for the
That's what
teachers?
I'm wondering, is that enough?
Because
No.
one faculty meeting obviously isn't enough.
No, I mean, but you're not gonna train them on, that's a framework,
Right.
that's just
Yeah.
the framework itself, we're not talking about, you can't do that restorative justice or
Implementation.
anything like that
Yeah.
there, no. But I think they need the review by then. And I think what each school is going to need might be different, as far as implementation.
Okay.
Alright, anything else specific?
So
Alright, I will send these
should
notes
we-
to everybody,
Should we read this recommendation out and then just take a formal vote that this is what we wanna present?
okay?
How many do we have?
not enough now.
You're fine, I think.
I think most of this was here, the major recommendations, the timelines are more the
You didn't do
steps
the vote
along
with
the
the
way,
people, though.
you know, I think I heard agreement on the big things, and then I just wrote, did say I'll add the
I
specific.
think you have enough to
details
vote,
for
you have enough to vote.
Okay. Okay, so the recommendation is to adopt the positive behavior intervention support system to create a common language of definitions. Steps under that, send the additional 3 high school administrators to PBS training this May, send elementary principals to PBS training to be determined. I'll add that in.
Okay.
Create a consistent code of conduct, including a tiered behavioral framework with a range of options. Step, draft to be created by school administrators by September. Create school-based student representatives. Committee of teachers, students, and families to review the draft and make amendments by November 15th, 2025. Principals will review in a faculty meeting. Last part, formalizing the use of restored practices, send key members from each school to train the trainer. I did put a date next school year.
Okay.
And then, cause then we can figure out how to train the faculty after that. I have to be a little vague, cause I'm not, we have to look at what the trainings are happening and what time they're happening and when
Yep.
they're happening, when they're local, things like that.
Okay.
Alright, does that sound good?
Sound good?
Okay, on to
So-
formal.
Is there a motion to approve this recommendation then?
I'll move it.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Right, it's unanimous. So,
I'm happy to formalize it
Yeah.
for you to submit to school committee if you'd like.
yep, and you can be there too.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it won't be tomorrow night, cause it's
No,
not on
no,
the,
no.
it's not
But we can
official
get on the
recommend,
agenda.
but we can put it on the second meeting in February to do the official recommendation. Cause tomorrow is just an update.
As soon as I'll just do a little research, I have a little bit of time tomorrow to do that, and then I can send it to you.
Okay. Or did
Alright.
you want it tomorrow, Erin?
No, you don't have it on the agenda
Yeah.
for tomorrow.
We don't-
I don't
Just-
think there's
just-
another meeting in February, that's what I was looking at, so it would be on the March 4th agenda.
March fourth?
March 4th.
Okay.
You got a
Oh,
little bit of time,
because-
Rachel?
Oh, it's because of
No,
February,
I'm
it's
gonna get it
February
done
vacation, that's why there's
soon
not another
because
meeting.
I don't,
Okay.
I don't want it hanging over my head.
Yep, no. Alright,
Alright, thank you, everybody.
is there a motion
Appreciate it.
to adjourn? Adjourn, second? Second, all those in favor? Aye. Alright,
Thank you.
Let me shut the camera off.